I just wanted to end now on a couple of final reflections and thoughts. Firstly, what I want to do is implore you, really as the next generation of ecologists, you could say, to think a little more critically about some of the assumptions of your disciplines. Don't just blindly swallow the positions of your older colleagues, including me, although I'd ask you to be a little bit more sensitive towards my views. Restoration in ecology in particular was developed and propagated mostly by baby boomers, who often still hold very dearly to it and the assumptions that underpin it. But there's an old saying that goes that something along the lines of science progresses one funeral at a time, and as the boomers head into senescence over the next few decades, this discussion in this space is likely to ramp up. And I'd implore you during this time not to nail your colours to the mast of this older generation, but instead to keep your mind open to possibilities. In saying all of that, you also need to be careful about how you do it. You probably need to be a lot more careful than I am, for example. It is, after all, a very small industry that we have. And sometimes if you don't express the views of your employers, of politicians, and sometimes even of the majority of your colleagues and your peers, you do put yourself in the line of fire very, very quickly. People like these, for example, take this stuff very, very seriously. They take it very personally, and they're not afraid to come after you personally if you contradict them as well. So you do, at the end of the day, have to be careful about how you talk about the birds and the bees, and whether that's right or whether that makes sense is sometimes beyond the point. So to end on a more playful note now, and because no one can stop talking about this guy, I thought I'd conclude with a little Trump analogy of my own. And this is partly because I've been accused myself recently of displaying a couple of Trump-like qualities. So I've noticed that Trump, for a lot of people, has kind of become the new Hitler. And, you know, if you want to discredit someone, you basically just point to any characteristic you see as vaguely Trump-like. It's a very easy strategy, of course, because Trump's views are so varied and often contradictory that we all essentially have a little bit of Trump in us. So some people, for example, have said that my research is just an attempt to get attention, that I'm just up here grandstanding and trying to get on TV or something, just like Trump, they might say. And it came up actually in my interview with Kim Hill. Kim asked me at one point, she said something like, you know, Jamie, is this just an attempt to get attention? And I responded with something like, you know, there are easier ways to get attention than, you know, spending years of your life writing a PhD thesis, much easier ways. Again, this one really usefully illustrates the attitude out there, that there can only be one way to think about nature and the environment, and that if you think differently, you must be crazy, or you must be ignorant, or you must be just wanting to get attention, of course. The other Trump accusation that's been levelled at me is that I'm some sort of post-truth advocate, denying what are taken to be the obvious facts about how we must value our environments and how we must think about the concept of nature. Of course, for some people, all of these facts about how we should value nature were carved in slate by baby boomers in the 1970s and 80s, and woe betide anyone who questions boomer wisdom. Again, it's another example of the real absence of critical reflection on the value-laden assumptions of ecology and the environment. But seeing as we're doing this exercise, how about we just turn it around for a minute? Let's think for a moment, just for argument's sake, whether there are any similarities between Donald Trump and mainstream conservationists. So let's put Trump's head in there, and we'll maybe make that a rat, seeing as he's strangling the rat. We'll add some appropriately nationalistic slogan in there as well. And just to complete the picture, we'll make that a Mexican rat. So if we move forward from here, what are some similarities between Trump or Trump supporters and your average mainstream conservationist? Well, firstly, demographics. Trump supporters are not unlike your typical conservationists. They're generally white, middle class, male dominated. Looking around this room, it's a very white audience. It's not that dissimilar for most forest and bird audiences, most ecological society audiences. How about whether there are any similarities between the two groups' overall vision? Well, Trump's vision is that the world, of course, was better in the past. And for him, that great time was probably in the 1950s and the 1960s, which incidentally was a time when black people couldn't eat at the same restaurant as white people, when women were discouraged from working, when animal welfare was virtually non-existent, and so on and so forth. But white guys found it pretty easy to get a job, so it wasn't all bad, right? Conservationists, for their part, also think that life was better in the past. They just tend to take it a step further in the sense that they think that life was better before they existed. Okay, and thirdly, who's to blame? Who's responsible for our troubles? Well, for Trump, naturally it is foreigners, it's immigrants. Not all immigrants, mind you. The useful kinds are okay. The ones that pick your fruit, that wash your clothes, take your kids to school, these ones are all fine. It's the illegal immigrants for Trump that are the real problem, the criminal gangs and whatnot, the murderers, the rapists, the terrorists. And mainstream conservationists, well, they also tend to think that foreigners are to blame. Again, not all of them. The useful ones are okay, the sheep, the kiwi fruit, the cabbages, the honeybees. These are all useful things. These things are okay. It's the ones that make a menace of themselves, the ones that forget their place, the weeds and pests. These are the ones that need to go. And finally, the solution to the problem. Here again, Trump and conservationists are in broad agreement. For both parties, the solution is to get rid of these foreigners, to send them back where they came from, Australia, Asia, Mexico, wherever the hell they came from. Who knows, who cares? They just need to go because they're causing problems for the locals. And if we can't do that, if we can't get rid of them entirely, we're of course going to have to build a wall. A wall to keep the good and rightful natives on the one side and the exotic scum on the other. And as you can see with this very scientific montage that I now have brought up, all in all, it's a very nasty situation that's just crying out for a hero, I won't say who, to swoop down and save the day. But it's going to take all of his superpowers to save us from these wicked villains and their diabolical schemes. But, seriously though, this kind of bullshit is exactly the kind of stuff that we really need to be getting away from. Because discussions around people's ideas about nature and the environment and how we should think about it and manage it are always going to be complex. You're always going to have different parties discussing these things from different perspectives and through different lenses. And for me, this isn't a debate about good guys and bad guys. And similarly, it shouldn't be seen as a debate between good species and bad species. Almost everyone who's working and thinking in the environmental space has good intentions, and we probably all agree on more things than we disagree on. But we have slightly different visions for the future and what our ideal environment looks like and how we should get there, or whether we should even get there. To my mind, there's no categorically right way to think about nature and the environment, and anyone who tells you there is patently overreaching. If we're going to progress our collective understandings of how best to value and manage our environments, we need to keep those communication lines open and stop resorting to these militant and often unproductive polarities. So that basically concludes my talk now. I just want to mention a couple of things that are coming up over the next few months. Firstly, I'll be going along to the Crazy Ambitious Conference, which is held next month at Te Papa here in Wellington. In case you haven't noticed, that's essentially a Predator-Free New Zealand conference. And I'll be speaking on one of the panel discussions there about the merits, and probably in my case, demerits of Predator-Free. I encourage you to come along and listen to that and contribute to that sort of conference and listen to the other presentations there. I'll also be giving a talk here at Vic in June to the School of Biological Sciences. I'm not sure what exactly I'll be talking about then, but it will be thought-provoking, I hope. And finally, I want to say that I'm now a regular contributor to SciBlogs. A lot of you all know SciBlogs. It's a sort of platform for scientists to communicate with the public and other scientists through blogs. Meaning that I'll be posting more regular thoughts in that forum. If you get a chance, I'd really encourage you to read the odd post in there, maybe offer some comments, and test me out a little. I'd really appreciate that. As you can imagine, I do enjoy a bit of spirited back and forth. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for listening.